part and parcel of our discussion on this particular ayah in the Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He guides whom He or she wills for himself or herself to be guided, is to respond to yet another question that arises in this context, and that is, it is true, it's a true and a legitimate observation that some people are born into better circumstances of life that are more conducive to them making better choices, are more conducive for them to be guided, basically. So just to give you an example on what that exactly means, imagine, for instance, someone who is born to a family of extremely pious scholars, for instance, very good people, very good Muslims, have always tried to do the right thing. They spent so much time and exerted a tremendous amount of effort to raise their children the proper way, and they instilled all kinds of, or at least tried to instill all kinds of good manners and good ethics and adab into the hearts of their children. So obviously a child who grows up in an environment like this has a better chance in growing up to become a more committed and more devoted worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, you think of another example in which someone was Allah's will for that person. I mean, you don't choose which family you're born to, right? So it was basically Allah's will for another person to be born to a family of drug dealers or prostitutes or whatever it is that they're doing. And basically, all the values that you've been exposed to, all the teachings that you've been exposed to your entire life is, you just have to follow along with the business of your parents. So, you have to be involved with us in the drug dealing business, or, whatever it may be. And obviously for a person like this, it becomes increasingly difficult to make better choices in your life, because, this is everything you know. And so, does the environment interfere with your free will, or do you still have a choice at the end? And obviously you still have a choice. There's no question about that, but it's just extremely difficult. Why is it easy for this guy who was born to a family of pious scholars to become a good person, and it's just so difficult for the other person who was born to a family of drug dealers to grow up to be a good person? Is there an element of injustice there? Is this fair? And let me respond to this by giving you an example that, inshallah ta'ala, can actually make this clear. Take, for instance, health issues, to give you an example, obesity. So people who have a tendency, again, see, I use the word tendency here. People who have the tendency to become obese, it is suggested that they have that coded in their genes, basically. So your genes would make you predisposed to become obese, right? So you have that predisposition, that tendency, so to speak. However, doctors and biologists and nutritionists, they say, even though your genetic code creates the predisposition for you to become obese, it is your dietary habits, it is decisions you make as far as eating that actually pull the trigger, right? So basically your genes load the gun, and your choices or decisions, pull the trigger and fire it. And going back to the examples that we mentioned earlier, the person that grew up in a family of scholars and pious people, and the other person who grew up in a family of crooks, basically. Now in this situation, it is not really their genes, right? I mean, we're not talking about genes here, but we're talking about nurture. We're talking about environment. So the environment creates a predisposition. The environment creates a tendency, but at the end of the day, you are the one who pulls the trigger. You are the one who will choose for yourself whether to follow guidance or whether to be misguided, basically, or to follow the path of misguidance, or to stray from the path of guidance. And that is an extremely important concept, because in this context, when we look at the predisposition, we can just say that tendencies actually pose challenges, right? But they do not restrain you. They do not, restrain you in chains, basically, because you still have that choice at the end. And in that context, we can actually look at those predispositions as tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throws your way. So you are being tested. So if I was born to a family of scholars, it is much easier for me to follow along and to become a scholar, or to become a scholar of Islam or a pious person. But I might have other weaknesses in my personality. Maybe my parents were not very brave, so I grow up to become a coward, and I'm unable to express my opinion or to speak publicly or stand up for justice when the time comes, right? I might grow up in a family of scholars, and I have a great knowledge of the deen, and I try to avoid things that are haram. But I was pampered so much when I was growing up that it is extremely difficult for me to resist food, for instance, so I become obese. And someone else who does not have the same tendency to become obese, but has the tendency to rob, or the tendency to do something else that could be haram or could be harmful, right? So every single one of us has some tendency, a tendency of some sort. A tendency that might lead us to unforeseeable circumstances, or it may or may not lead us to haram circumstances, but it is a tendency. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not judge us based on those tendencies, but rather He judges us based on the decisions that we make in regards to that tendency or that predisposition. So it might be extremely difficult for this guy that was brought up by drug dealers to become a pious Muslim, but he or she still has that choice to make at the end of the day. And the other guy that grew up in a family of scholars, maybe it is easier for him to become a good Muslim, but it is very difficult for him to do other things, because everyone suffers from something. Everyone suffers from a shortcoming. Everyone suffers from some kind of a tendency or a predisposition. So looking at things in that light, I hope inshallah ta'ala will clarify this particular matter, that we just have to go through those tests, and it is our decisions at the end that would define who we are and what our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should look like.